The listing had been on the county auction site for 11 days when I found it. A 3-bedroom ranch on Harlow Street in a town called Brixton, 40 miles south of Indianapolis. The photograph showed a sagging roof, peeling siding the color of spoiled cream, and a front yard that had surrendered to crabgrass sometime during the Obama administration. The starting bid was $8,000. I put in 12 and won it by Tuesday afternoon. Nobody else had even placed an offer. My name is Joel Maddox. I was 31 years old, recently divorced, and working as a regional IT consultant for a chain of veterinary clinics across central Indiana. My apartment lease was expiring. My savings account held just under $40,000, most of it from selling the condo Rachel and I had shared in Carmel. Buying a foreclosure felt like the kind of reckless, self-reinventing decision that men make when their therapists tell them to stop playing it safe. I told myself it was an investment, a project, something to fill the weekends that had become unbearably quiet since Rachel took the dog and moved to her sister's place in Louisville. I drove down to Brixton on a Saturday in late September. The town had that specific rural Indiana quality where everything looks 15 years behind and oddly dignified about it. A grain elevator, a Dollar General, a high school with a football field that still had actual bleachers instead of stadium seating. Harlow Street sat on the eastern edge, where residential blocks gave way to corn stubble and telephone poles leaning like tired old men. The house was worse than the photos. The porch had a visible sag in the middle. 2 windows on the south side were boarded. The back door was secured with a padlock that someone from the county had installed after the previous owner defaulted. I had the key from the title company. When I turned it, the lock resisted, then gave with a sound like a knuckle cracking. Inside, the air was stale and cool, carrying that particular scent of a house that had been sealed and abandoned, dust, old carpet, something faintly mineral. The kitchen had laminate countertops curling at the edges. The living room ceiling showed a water stain shaped like a hand reaching for something it would never grasp. But the bones were solid. The foundation was poured concrete, no cracks. The framing was straight. The furnace was ancient, but functional. I could work with this. It was my neighbor, Darlene Rusk, who first mentioned the basement. She came over that afternoon while I was hauling garbage bags of old curtains to the driveway. Darlene was 60-something, silver-haired, wearing a quilted vest over a Purdue sweatshirt. She carried a plate of brownies wrapped in cellophane. "You bought the Caulfield place," she said, not quite a question. "I did. You know about the basement?" I told her I'd seen the listing. It mentioned a partial basement, unfinished. Darlene set the brownies on the porch railing and looked at me with an expression I would later recognize as careful evaluation. "Gary Caulfield was a particular kind of man," she said. "Lived alone for almost 20 years. Worked at the Allison plant before it closed. After that, he just stayed inside and built things." She didn't elaborate. I thanked her for the brownies and forgot about the conversation for almost 3 hours until I found the door. It was in the hallway between the kitchen and the single bathroom. A narrow door I had assumed was a linen closet. But when I opened it, there were stairs, concrete stairs, leading down into a darkness that felt heavier than a normal unlit room should. The air rising from below was cool, dry, and carried a strange metallic taste, like licking a battery. I turned on my phone's flashlight and descended. What I found at the bottom was not a partial unfinished basement. It was a bunker. And that discovery, standing at the base of those stairs with my phone light cutting a pale wedge into the darkness, divided my life into 2 unmistakable halves, the time before I understood what Gary Caulfield had been preparing for, and everything that came after. The bunker stretched further than the footprint of the house above. That was the first thing that didn't make sense. The basement, according to the property survey, was listed at 600 square feet. What I was standing in was easily triple that. Gary Caulfield had excavated outward, beneath his own backyard, and possibly beneath the property line, into the adjacent lot. The walls were reinforced concrete, the ceiling supported by steel I-beams that looked industrial grade. The floor was sealed concrete, smooth and slightly sloped toward a central drain. I moved through it slowly, my phone light sweeping across things that made my breath catch in increments. The first room was storage. Floor-to-ceiling metal shelving units, military surplus by the look of them, lined 3 walls. They held canned goods, hundreds of cans, organized by type. Vegetables on the left, proteins in the center, fruits on the right. Below the shelves sat 5-gallon buckets with Gamma Seal lids labeled in permanent marker. Rice, oats, lentils, powdered milk, sugar. I counted 32 buckets before I stopped counting. The second room held water. 2 500-gallon polyethylene tanks, plumbed into a filtration system I didn't recognize. A hand pump was mounted to the wall beside a small stainless steel sink. The third room was a sleeping quarters. 2 bunk beds bolted to the wall. Military-style wool blankets, vacuum-sealed in plastic. A small shelf held books, field manuals, medical references, a Bible, and a battered copy of Alas, Babylon by Pat Frank. The fourth room stopped me. It was an armory, not a gun safe, a room. A steel door with a combination lock, which was hanging open, revealed a space roughly 8 by 10 feet, lined with pegboard and custom-fitted brackets. Most of the brackets were empty, but 3 long guns remained. A pump-action shotgun, a bolt-action rifle with a scope, and an AR pattern rifle with 2 magazines taped together jungle style. Ammunition boxes sat on a lower shelf. Handwritten inventory tags were clipped to each weapon's bracket. I stood in that room for a long time. The silence down there was absolute. The kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums and makes you aware of your own pulse. Gary Caulfield had not been a casual prepper. This was infrastructure. This was someone who had spent years and significant resources building a survival installation beneath a house that, from the outside, looked like it could barely keep the rain out. The contrast between the decay above and the precision below made my skin feel tight. I went back upstairs and sat on the porch with one of Darlene's brownies. The sun was going down behind the grain elevator, turning the sky a color that seemed too beautiful for the weight of what I'd just found. I called my buddy Marcus, who lived in Bloomington and worked as a contractor. "You're not going to believe what's under this house," I said. "Mold?" he said. "A bunker, like a real one. Water tanks, food storage, weapons." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Are the weapons legal?" "I think so. Indiana doesn't require registration. They came with the property." "Joel, that's either the best deal in the history of real estate or the opening scene of a horror movie." I laughed. He didn't. "I'm serious," Marcus said. "Why would someone build all that and then just lose the house to foreclosure? Where's the guy who built it?" I didn't have an answer for that. The title company had told me the previous owner had defaulted on property taxes 3 years unpaid. No forwarding address, no estate filing. Gary Caulfield had simply vanished from the public record that night. I slept in my car in the driveway because the house didn't have running water yet, and the electricity wouldn't be reconnected until Monday. I kept thinking about those stairs, that metallic taste in the air, the careful, obsessive organization of a man who had clearly believed, with absolute conviction, that something terrible was coming. Through the windshield, the stars over Brixton were sharp and numerous in a way they never were in Indianapolis. I told myself Gary Caulfield had been paranoid. I told myself a lot of things that first night. 3 weeks into renovation, I had the house livable. Marcus drove up 2 weekends in a row and helped me replace the porch joists, patch the roof, and get the plumbing functional. The electricity came back on that first Monday as promised, and with it, storry. The bunker revealed itself in full, fluorescent clarity. Gary had wired the entire underground space on its own circuit, powered by a transfer switch connected to a diesel generator in a ventilated alcove near the back wall. The generator had fuel. The switch worked. When I flipped it, the bunker hummed to life like a submarine surfacing. I started sleeping in the house. The master bedroom was small but functional once I hauled out the stained carpet and put down temporary laminate. I bought a mattress from a liquidation store in Columbus and a space heater from the hardware store on Brixton's main drag, run by a man named Dale Purcell, who seemed to know everything about everyone. "Caulfield Place, huh?" Dale said when I told him the address. He adjusted his glasses the way people do when they're deciding how much to say. Gary was in here every other week for about 6 years. Bought PVC, conduit, concrete mix by the pallet. I figured he was building a swimming pool. It wasn't a swimming pool. Dale looked at me for a long time. "No," he said. "I don't imagine it was." It was Dale who told me Gary had a daughter. Her name was Nora Caulfield, and she lived or had lived in Terre Haute. She hadn't been seen in Brixton in years. The way Dale said it suggested estrangement, not distance. I didn't think much about Nora Caulfield at first. I was too occupied with the house, with the strange pleasure of making something neglected into something functional. I painted the kitchen. I replaced the bathroom vanity. I fixed the back door so it closed without persuasion. Each small repair felt like I was proving something to myself that I could build a life from salvage. That starting over didn't have to mean starting from nothing. The bunker, meanwhile, I left mostly untouched. I inventoried its contents out of curiosity and practicality. The food stores were astonishing. Conservatively, enough calories for 2 people for 18 months. The water filtration system was gravity-fed and could process rainwater collected through a concealed intake on the property's east side, disguised as a downspout. The ventilation ran through a series of filtered ducts that exited through what appeared to be a defunct dryer vent. The man had thought of everything. What he hadn't thought of, apparently, was paying his property taxes. The first sign that something was wrong beyond my little renovation project came on a Thursday evening in mid-October. I was watching the news on a second-hand television I'd picked up from Goodwill when a segment caught my attention. A correspondent stood in front of a hospital in Louisville, Rachel City, I noted with a reflex of old pain, reporting on an unusual cluster of patients presenting with extreme agitation, fever, and what was described as acute behavioral disruption. 14 people had been admitted in the past 48 hours. 3 had attacked hospital staff. 1 had bitten a paramedic badly enough to sever a tendon. The anchor transitioned to a public health official who used the word investigation 4 times in 90 seconds without saying anything concrete. I texted Rachel, just a simple message. "You okay? Saw something about Louisville hospitals on the news." She replied 20 minutes later. "Fine, it's overblown. Some kind of drug interaction thing. How's the money pit?" "Coming along," I typed. "Found a bunker in the basement." "Of course you did," she wrote back, followed by a single laughing emoji. That was the last normal text message I ever received from her. The next morning, I drove into town for coffee and supplies. The gas station on Route 46 had a handwritten sign on the door. Limit 2 gas cans per customer. The woman behind the counter, whose name tag read Peggy, wouldn't make eye contact when I asked why. People are stocking up, she said, and changed the subject to the weather. Outside, 2 pickup trucks with out-of-state plates were parked at the pumps, their beds loaded with plastic totes and cases of bottled water. The news accelerated in a way that felt both alarming and oddly distant, the way disasters always do when they're happening somewhere else. Louisville reported 67 cases by Friday. Then Cincinnati had 30. Then St. Louis, Memphis, Nashville. The CDC issued a statement using language so carefully constructed it said almost nothing. Novel pathogenic agent. Enhanced surveillance protocols. No immediate cause for public alarm. The internet, predictably, lost its mind. I spent that weekend in the bunker, not out of fear, but out of a new and uncomfortable respect for Gary Caulfield. I read through a binder I'd found in the sleeping quarters, a handwritten operational manual, 63 pages, detailing every system in the bunker. Water purification schedules, generator maintenance intervals, food rotation protocols, weapons cleaning procedures, radio frequencies for emergency broadcasts. The handwriting was small and precise, the work of a man who treated preparation as a moral obligation. On the last page, in different ink, he had written a single sentence: "When they stop telling you the truth has already arrived." Monday morning, Marcus called. His voice had a quality I hadn't heard before. Not panic, but the careful neutrality of someone managing panic. "Have you been watching?" he asked. "Some. There are cases in Indianapolis now, 12 confirmed. They're calling it Raines syndrome, after the first doctor who documented it. Joel, the videos online, I know half of them are fake, but the other half..." "What videos?" "People attacking people, not like fights, like something else, like they've forgotten how to be human." I opened my laptop and spent the next 2 hours falling down a digital well. The footage was grainy, shaky, shot on phones held by trembling hands. A woman in a hospital gown sprinting across a parking lot on all fours. A man slamming his head against a glass door repeatedly, leaving red-brown smears until the glass gave way. A security camera in what appeared to be a grocery store showing 3 people converging on a 4th with a coordinated predatory efficiency that made my stomach clench. The comment sections were a mixture of disbelief, dark humor, and genuine terror. I drove to Dale's hardware store that afternoon. The parking lot was fuller than I'd ever seen it. Inside, people were buying plywood, batteries, duct tape, and padlocks. Dale stood behind the counter with the expression of a man watching a prediction he'd never wanted to make come true. "You've got that bunker," he said to me quietly, ringing up my purchase of additional flashlight batteries and a crowbar. "I do." Gary knew. I don't know how, but he knew. Knew what? Dale looked past me to the line of customers stretching toward the door. "That it wouldn't hold," he said. "Whatever we'd built, he knew it wouldn't hold." That evening, Darlene Rusk knocked on my door. She was carrying a canvas bag, and her expression had changed from the cheerful neighbor who brought brownies to something harder and more focused. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest," she said. "How much room is in that bunker?" I hesitated. "Enough." "For how many?" "Gary built it for 2, it looks like. But there's floor space for more." Darlene set the canvas bag on my kitchen table. Inside were prescription medications, blood pressure pills, thyroid medication, antibiotics. "My husband Frank is in a wheelchair," she said. "He's a veteran. He can't move fast and he can't climb stairs without help. If this gets bad, Joel, we have nowhere to go. I thought about the bunk beds bolted to the concrete wall, the careful labels on the supply buckets, the armory with its remaining weapons. "If it gets bad," I said, "you come here." She held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded once, turned and walked back across the yard to her own house, where I could see the blue light of a television flickering behind drawn curtains. I locked my doors that night, something I hadn't done since moving in. Brixton was the kind of town where people didn't lock doors. It was no longer that kind of town. The governor declared a state of emergency on Wednesday. Indianapolis reported over 300 cases. The National Guard deployed to establish what they called containment perimeters around affected neighborhoods, which in practice meant barricading streets with Humvees and concertina wire, while people inside those perimeters screamed for help and people outside took videos. I watched a press conference where a general in pressed fatigues assured the public that the situation was contained and manageable. Behind him, visible through the window of the briefing room, a column of black smoke rose from somewhere in the city. Brixton remained quiet, but the quiet had a different texture now. It was the quiet of people waiting. The Dollar General sold out of canned goods by Thursday noon. The gas station ran dry by Thursday evening. The school closed indefinitely, citing precautionary measures. Parents stood in their driveways watching their children play in the yard, with a particular alertness of people who have mentally rehearsed grabbing their kids and running. I started preparing the bunker in earnest. I ran extension cords for additional lighting. I cleared floor space in the main room and laid down foam sleeping pads I'd ordered online before the shipping delays hit. I tested the generator, changed its oil, and calculated fuel consumption. At moderate load, I had roughly 3 weeks of continuous power. I checked the water tanks both full. I tested the hand pump. I ran the filtration system and confirmed it functioned. The weapons I cleaned and loaded. The shotgun was a Remington 870, reliable and familiar. My uncle had owned one, and I'd shot trap with him as a teenager. The bolt action was a Savage .308 with a decent scope. The AR was a Smith & Wesson M and P15, standard configuration. I found cleaning kits and manuals in a drawer beneath the pegboard. Gary's ammunition stores included roughly 500 rounds total across all calibers, organized in labeled ammo cans. Not an arsenal, but substantial. Marcus called Friday morning. "Roads out of Indy are gridlocked," he said. "I'm going to try to come up tomorrow morning, early, before the traffic builds." "How bad is it there?" A pause. "I saw one last night. One of the infected, outside my building. A woman. She was standing under a streetlight, just standing there, and her head was moving in this. It wasn't natural, like a bird tracking something. Then a car drove by and she went after it. She caught it at the stop sign and put her hands through the driver's side window. Through the glass, Joel. I heard it shatter from 4 stories up. 'Get here,' I said. 'Whatever you have to do.' 'I'm bringing Keisha,' he said. Keisha Washington was his girlfriend, a nurse at IU Health. She's seen things at the hospital she won't talk about. Bring her. Bring whatever supplies you can carry." After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen and realized my hands were shaking. Not from fear exactly, but from the sudden, vertiginous understanding that the distance between normal life and this, whatever this was, had collapsed in less than a week. 7 days ago, I'd been spackling drywall and listening to podcasts about home renovation. Now I was loading magazines in an underground bunker and calculating how many people I could keep alive. That evening, I walked to Darlene's house. Frank Rusk was in his wheelchair by the living room window. a big man reduced by a stroke 3 years earlier to limited mobility on his left side. He had sharp eyes and a handshake that still carried authority. "Marine," he said by way of introduction. "2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, Beirut, Panama, Desert Storm." "Joel Maddox," I said. "IT consultant." Frank almost smiled. "Well," he said, "we all have our crosses." Darlene had already packed 2 suitcases and a cooler. "When?" she asked me. I looked out her window toward my house, toward the ordinary street that still looked like any other street in any other small Indiana town. "Tomorrow," I said, "before dark." The street lights on Harlow Street came on as I walked home. They cast their usual amber pools on the pavement, but the shadows between them seemed deeper now, and I found myself walking faster through each one. Marcus and Keisha arrived at dawn on Saturday, driving a loaded Honda CR-V with a mattress strapped to the roof rack. Marcus looked like he hadn't slept. Keisha looked worse. She had the hollow, focused expression of someone operating on clinical detachment because the alternative was collapse. "There was a checkpoint on 37 south of Martinsville," Marcus said, unloading boxes from the back seat. "National Guard. They searched the car, asked where we were going." The soldier who talked to us was maybe 20 years old, and his hands were shaking. Keisha carried a large duffel bag directly inside without speaking. I learned later it contained medical supplies she'd taken from the hospital before leaving: suture kits, IV bags, broad-spectrum antibiotics, painkillers, a portable blood pressure cuff, and a stethoscope. "The hospital is gone," she said finally, sitting at my kitchen table, wrapping both hands around a mug of coffee. "Not physically. It's still standing. But the system is gone. We were admitting infected patients into the ER, and they were turning in the beds, attacking staff. We lost 4 nurses in one shift. 4. The administration told us to keep working. Some people did. I couldn't." Marcus put his hand on her shoulder. She didn't seem to feel it. We moved the Rusks in that afternoon. Frank's wheelchair fit through the bunker door, but not down the stairs. Marcus and I carried him, which he endured with the grim silence of a man who had survived worse indignities. Darlene followed with the suitcases, her face set in that particular expression of practical determination that I would come to rely on more than almost anything else in the weeks ahead. 6 people, 1 bunker. The math was simple, but the reality was not. I gathered everyone in the main room that evening. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The concrete walls gave our voices a flat, contained quality. We sat on folding chairs and sleeping pads, arranged in a rough circle, and I realized with some discomfort that they were all looking at me. "I didn't build this place," I said. "I bought a cheap house and found it. But it's here, and we're here. And I think we need to be honest about what's happening." Frank spoke first. "What's happening is a societal collapse event triggered by a pathogen that causes homicidal psychosis. I've read the reports. The infected lose higher brain function within hours. They become predatory. They don't die easily, and they don't stop." Keisha nodded. "The neurological damage is total. Whatever Rain syndrome is, it destroys the prefrontal cortex and amplifies the amygdala. They're not people anymore. They're threat response systems with human bodies." Darlene folded her hands in her lap. "So what do? "We stay here," I said. "We have food for months, water, filtration, a generator. We wait it out." "Wait for what?" Marcus asked. Not challenging, genuinely asking. "For the military to contain it, for a treatment, for whatever comes next." The silence that followed was heavy with everything none of us wanted to say. That containment might not come, that treatment might not exist, that what came next might be worse. We divided responsibilities that first night. I handled security and generator maintenance. Marcus managed structural needs and physical labor. Keisha was medical authority. Darlene coordinated food preparation and rationing. Frank, limited in mobility but sharp in mind, became our intelligence officer, monitoring the hand-crank radio Gary had left in the supply room, logging broadcast frequencies and information. We ate canned soup heated on a camp stove. We listened to Frank cycle through radio stations, most of which played either emergency broadcasts or static. One station, a low-power AM out of Terre Haute, had a woman reading names of survivor gathering points in a voice that cracked every few sentences. That night, in my bunk, listening to the breathing of 5 other people in the dark, I thought about Gary Caulfield. I wondered where he was. I wondered if he had built this place knowing someone else might need it, or if he had simply run out of time, money, and reasons to stay. Either way, his preparation had become our salvation. For now. The first infected reached Brixton on Tuesday, 4 days after we sealed the bunker. Frank picked it up on the radio before we heard it ourselves, a frantic transmission from the volunteer fire department on the west side of town, calling for anyone with weapons to come to the elementary school, then static. I went upstairs alone, against Marcus's protest, to look through the front windows. The street was empty in the gray morning light, but I could hear something distant and rhythmic, a car alarm, pulsing without anyone to silence it. Then closer, a sound I had never heard before and hoped to never hear again. A human voice producing a noise that was neither scream nor speech. A guttural, continuous vocalization that carried across the empty yards like a declaration of territory. I saw her through the kitchen window, a woman in a bathrobe, barefoot on the asphalt, moving in a direction that seemed purposeless until I realized she was tracking scent. Her head swept side to side in slow arcs, nostrils visibly flaring. Her skin had a grayish pallor, and her posture was wrong, hunched forward, arms slightly raised, fingers curled. She moved past Darlene's empty house and continued east, toward the cornfields. I went back down and told the group what I'd seen. Keisha asked clinical questions: estimated speed, apparent awareness, physical deterioration. Frank asked tactical ones: alone or in a group, armed or unarmed, responsive to sound or light. Marcus asked the question none of us wanted to answer. Is Brixton lost? One infected doesn't mean the town is lost, I said. One that we saw, Marcus replied. He was right. By afternoon, we could hear sporadic gunfire from somewhere north of us, toward the center of town. Dale Purcell's hardware store was that direction. So was the gas station, the Dollar General, the high school. The sounds were irregular, not the controlled cadence of military operations, but the panicked, scattered firing of civilians defending their homes with whatever they had. We stayed underground. That was the plan, and for 3 days, the plan held. Frank monitored the radio in 4-hour shifts. The emergency broadcast system played a looped message instructing residents to remain indoors and await military assistance. The AM station from Terre Haute went silent on Wednesday. An FM station out of Bloomington broadcast for another day, then cut to dead air mid-sentence. The isolation was its own particular kind of pressure. 6 adults in a concrete space, breathing recycled air, eating rationed meals, listening to the muffled sounds of a world disassembling itself above their heads. Conversations grew shorter. Silences grew longer. The fluorescent lights, which never changed, created a timelessness that eroded our sense of day and night. Darlene maintained the most consistent composure. She portioned meals with mathematical precision, washed dishes in measured amounts of water, and kept a schedule posted on the wall: meal times, radio watch, generator checks, sleep periods. The routine was artificial, but it was architecture, and architecture was what kept the psychological walls standing. Keisha spent hours organizing her medical supplies, inventorying and re-inventorying, creating protocols for scenarios she narrated in a clinical monotone: infection treatment if someone was bitten, trauma management for blunt force wounds, rationing of antibiotics for secondary infections. Marcus sat beside her during these recitations, his presence steady and silent, the kind of support that doesn't need language. Frank was the one who found the other frequency. On Thursday night, cycling through short-wave bands on the hand-crank radio, he picked up a signal that was neither emergency broadcast nor dead air. A man's voice, calm and deliberate, reading GPS coordinates, and a single repeated phrase: gathering point active, armed welcome, coordinates follow. Frank copied the coordinates. I plotted them on a road map I'd found in Gary's supplies. The location was 17 miles northwest of Brixton, near a reservoir I vaguely knew existed. "Someone's organizing," Frank said, tapping the map with a thick finger. "Or baiting," Marcus said from across the room. We all looked at each other across the flat, humming light. The bunker was safe. The bunker was sealed. The bunker was also, inch by inch, becoming a coffin for 6 living people. Something had to change. We all felt it. None of us wanted to say it first. I was the one who said it. On Friday morning, standing over the camp stove while Darlene heated oatmeal, I told the group I was going up. "Just a reconnaissance run," I said. "The house, the yard, the street. I need to see what's out there." Marcus insisted on coming. Keisha insisted we both carry weapons. Frank insisted on a communication protocol. 3 knocks on the bunker door meant all clear. Continuous knocking meant open fast. We ascended the stairs with the shotgun and the AR, which felt absurd and necessary in equal measure. The house was untouched, every window intact, every door sealed. But outside, through the dirty glass, Brixton had changed. Darlene's house had its front door open, not kicked in open, as if she had left it that way, which she hadn't. A dark stain spread across her porch steps. Across the street, the Kendall house I'd seen the family in passing, a young couple with twin girls, had a shattered front window. The curtain sucked partially outward by wind, flapping like a surrender flag. The sky was overcast, low and gray. Smoke hung in a thin haze from somewhere to the south. The street was littered with small debris. A child's bicycle on its side, a scatter of mail from an overturned mailbox, a single shoe. We stepped outside. The air hit me first, not the sealed, filtered air of the bunker, but the living, complex air of the surface, carrying smoke, damp earth, and something else. Something biological and sweet, like rotting fruit, but not fruit. Marcus and I moved down the street in a pattern that would have been laughable a month ago, covering angles, checking doorways, communicating in whispered fragments. We reached the intersection of Harlow and Vine, which gave a sightline down toward the center of town. The Dollar General's parking lot held 6 vehicles, 3 of them with doors standing open. The store's front window was destroyed. Inside, visible through the jagged opening, shelves lay toppled in a chaos of scattered products. A body lay in the parking lot near the entrance, an older man in jeans and a flannel shirt, face down, unmoving. I couldn't tell how he had died from this distance, and I didn't want to get closer. Marcus pointed east. two figures moved along the tree line beyond the last houses on Vine Street. They moved with that distinctive gait forward-leaning, arms loose, heads tracking that I had only seen on screens until now. Seeing it in person, in broad daylight, in a town where I had recently bought batteries and made small talk, created a cognitive rupture that I don't have adequate words for. It was not just fear. It was the sensation of reality deforming, of the rules that governed the world I had understood simply ceasing to apply. We watched them move into the cornfield and disappear. "There'll be more," Marcus said quietly. We scavenged what we could reach safely. From Darlene's house, additional blankets, Frank's backup wheelchair battery, a toolbox from the garage. From the Kendall house, empty, and I tried not to think about the twins' canned goods from the pantry, a first aid kit, 2 gallons of bleach. We loaded everything into a wheelbarrow from my backyard and made 3 trips to the bunker entrance. On the last trip, as Marcus lowered a box of supplies down the stairs, I stood alone in the kitchen and heard something that stopped my breath. A knock at the back door. Not the frantic hammering of the infected, but a deliberate, human knock. 3 measured strikes. I raised the shotgun and moved to the door. Through the small window, I saw a face. Female, mid-20s, dark hair pulled back, eyes wide but focused. She held her hands up, palms out. "I can see the light from your generator exhaust," she said, her voice muffled through the glass. "Please, I've been walking since Monday." She paused, and then said something that made the hair on my arms stand upright. "My name is Nora Caulfield. This was my father's house." I let her in. Marcus positioned himself at the top of the bunker stairs with the AR, covering the hallway, while I opened the back door and stepped aside. Nora entered quickly, scanning the room with a practiced alertness that told me she had been surviving, not just fleeing. She was thin in a way that spoke of recent deprivation rather than natural build. Her clothes, cargo pants, a hiking jacket, boots were dirty but deliberately chosen. She carried a backpack that clanked with the weight of metal objects, and a folding knife was clipped to her belt. "I know about the bunker," she said immediately before I could speak. "I know the layout, the systems, the access points. I helped him build the water intake when I was 16. "Your father is dead," she said flatly. 8 months ago, heart attack, alone in a motel room in Terre Haute. I found out from a county clerk when I tried to track down the property." She looked around the kitchen, at the new paint and the replaced vanity visible through the bathroom door. "You fixed the place up." "You came here for the bunker," I said. "I came here because my father spent 15 years building the only safe place I know of. And you happened to buy it." There was no accusation in her voice, only exhaustion. "I don't want it back. I want to survive." I brought her downstairs. The group's reaction was a gradient of wariness and relief. Another body meant another share of resources. But it also meant another pair of hands, and in Nora's case, something more valuable. She knew the bunker like her own body. Within an hour, she had shown us 3 things we'd missed. A concealed crawl-space exit behind the sleeping quarters that led to an underground passage emerging in the backyard drainage ditch, a secondary water intake valve we hadn't identified, and a hidden compartment in the armory floor containing 2 additional handguns and a sealed case of 9mm ammunition. "Dad was thorough," she said, with the resigned fondness of a daughter who had spent her adolescence helping a troubled man prepare for the end of civilization. Nora's account of the outside world filled the gaps our radio monitoring couldn't. She had been in Terre Haute when the outbreak reached critical mass. The city had descended into chaos within 72 hours. The National Guard had established a perimeter around the downtown core, then contracted it, then abandoned it entirely when the infection rate outpaced their ability to hold positions. She'd watched a convoy of military vehicles roll south on US 41, loaded with soldiers and equipment, retreating towards some staging area she never identified. "They're not coming back," she said. "Not for a town this size. Not for anywhere this size. The math doesn't work. There aren't enough of them, and there are too many infected." Frank absorbed this information with the calm of a man who had processed worst-case scenarios long before anyone else in the room. "What's the infection radius?" he asked. "How far has it spread?" "Everywhere I could see," Nora said. "Every town between here and Terre Haute has cases. The rural areas are slower because the population density is lower, but it's spreading along roadways. The infected follow traffic patterns, noise, light. They congregate in places where people used to congregate." "Stores," Darlene said. "Schools, churches." "Exactly." That night, with 7 people in the bunker instead of 6, I reorganized the sleeping arrangements. Nora took a foam pad on the floor of the storage room, between the shelving units, where she said she felt safer with walls close on either side. I understood the impulse. After days of open exposure, the bunker's confined spaces weren't claustrophobic, they were embracing. I found her later, sitting by the crawl space exit her father had built, staring into the dark passage with an expression I couldn't read. "He wrote you a letter," she said quietly. "I found it in the motel room with his things. It was addressed to whoever bought the house." She reached into her jacket and handed me a sealed envelope, yellowed and creased. I held it but didn't open it. Not yet. Some knowledge, I was learning, needs to arrive at the right moment. The letter waited on my bunk for 2 days while the situation above us deteriorated. On Sunday, the sounds from town ceased entirely. No more gunfire, no more car alarms, no more human noise of any kind. The silence was more frightening than the chaos had been, because chaos implied resistance, and silence implied its end. Frank's radio scans yielded diminishing returns. The short wave signal with the gathering point coordinates repeated for another day, then stopped. The emergency broadcast system switched from its looped instructions to a single tone, a high, continuous whine that Frank said was a default when the originating station lost its human operator. In the bunker, the dynamics were shifting. Marcus and Keisha had withdrawn into a private, protective unit, speaking to each other in whispers, sleeping with her head on his chest in a way that was both tender and territorial. Darlene maintained her schedules with increasing rigidity, her control over meal portions and cleaning protocols becoming the framework that kept her from considering the magnitude of what we had lost. Frank sat in his wheelchair by the radio, listening to frequencies that carried nothing, his face a weathered landscape of patience and resignation. Nora was different. She moved through the bunker with proprietary familiarity, touching walls and checking systems with the unconscious confidence of someone returning to a childhood home. She was competent, direct, and emotionally sealed in a way that made her both reliable and difficult to read. The conflict, when it came, arrived not through violence or catastrophe, but through the quiet, insistent pressure of proximity and fear. It started with water. Darlene's rationing system allocated 2 liters per person per day for drinking, with an additional shared allocation for cooking and sanitation. Keisha argued that medical protocols required more wound cleaning, sterilization, basic hygiene that prevented secondary infection. Darlene held firm. The water tanks held 1,000 gallons total. 7 people at 2 liters each meant roughly 68 days of supply. Increasing allocation shortened the timeline. "We don't know how long we need to be down here," Darlene said. "We don't know that anyone will be alive in 68 days to appreciate the saved water," Keisha replied. The argument escalated through Tuesday, conducted in tense, controlled voices that were more unsettling than shouting would have been. Marcus backed Keisha. Darlene held her position. Frank declined to take sides, which Darlene interpreted as betrayal. Nora listened without speaking, her dark eyes moving between the participants like a spectator at a match whose outcome she'd already predicted. I intervened with a compromise: slightly increased water allocation offset by activating the rainwater collection system Nora had identified. It required someone going topside to clear the intake, which meant exposure, which meant risk. I volunteered. Nora insisted on accompanying me. We went up on Wednesday morning. The world above was quiet and overcast, a light rain falling, which was ideal for our purposes. We moved around the side of the house to the concealed intake, which was clogged with leaf debris and required 10 minutes of clearing. Nora worked efficiently, her hands steady, her attention divided between the task and the surrounding environment, with a practiced split focus. "You do this well," I said. "My father raised me for this," she said, without looking up. Other girls had ballet and soccer. I had threat assessment and water purification. "Is that why you stopped coming around?" She paused, a handful of wet leaves dripping between her fingers. "I stopped coming around because I couldn't tell the difference between preparation and paranoia. And I was afraid that if I stayed, I wouldn't care about the difference anymore." She dropped the leaves and wiped her hands on her pants. Turns out the difference didn't matter. He was right. When we returned to the bunker, the mood had shifted again. Keisha sat apart from the group, her medical supplies spread around her in a defensive perimeter of organized tools and bandages. Marcus sat beside her, his jaw tight. Darlene was in the food storage room, counting cans with the focused intensity of a woman keeping herself together through arithmetic. Something was cracking beneath the surface of our small, sealed community. I opened Gary Caulfield's letter that night. The handwriting matched the operational manual: small, precise, deliberate. The letter was 2 pages, written on lined paper torn from a spiral notebook. "To whoever finds this place," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and something I spent my life expecting has probably arrived. I won't waste your time telling you I was right. Being right about the end of the world is not a thing that brings satisfaction." He wrote about the bunker's construction, 7 years of work, most of it alone, after Nora stopped coming. He described the engineering choices, the compromises forced by budget and physics, the systems he wished he'd built better. He warned about the generator's fuel injector, which tended to clog after extended use. He noted that the south wall of the water room had a hairline seep during heavy rain that should be monitored. Then the letter shifted. "I built this place because I believed something was coming. I still believe that. But I want to be honest with you about what building it cost me. I lost my daughter, not to death, but to my own obsession. I turned our relationship into a training exercise and our home into a construction site. She was right to leave. She was right to be angry. If Nora is alive and you meet her, tell her that the last thing I built was the crawl space exit behind the bunks. I built it so she could always get out. I never wanted her to feel trapped again." I set the letter down and stared at the concrete ceiling. Through the wall, I could hear Nora's breathing in the storage room, steady, rhythmic. The breathing of someone who had trained herself to sleep in uncomfortable places. I didn't tell her about the letter that night. I wasn't sure I had the right. Thursday brought a new crisis. Marcus, returning from an upstairs reconnaissance, reported movement on Harlow Street, not 1 or 2 infected, but a group. He counted 9, moving together in a loose cluster, traveling west along the road. Their behavior was different from the lone woman I'd seen the previous week. These moved with apparent coordination, pausing when one paused, redirecting when one redirected. Pack behavior, Nora said when he described it. My father predicted this in his notes. The pathogen doesn't just destroy cognition, it rewires social instinct. They're forming groups based on proximity and stimulus response, like wolves. Do they hunt? Frank asked. They respond to stimuli. Sound, light, movement, scent. Put enough of them together, and the response becomes cooperative. Whether that's hunting in any conscious sense is irrelevant. The result is the same. We instituted new protocols. No noise above background during daylight hours. Generator use restricted to nighttime only, when the exhaust would be less visible. The crawlspace exit was designated as the emergency evacuation route, with a rally point at the drainage ditch 50 yards east. Frank, who couldn't use the crawlspace, would remain with whoever stayed to open the main entrance from inside. The reality of Frank's situation settled over us like a weight distributed unevenly. In a crisis requiring speed, he was immobile. In a bunker requiring efficiency, he occupied space. In a group requiring consensus, his military experience gave him authority that his physical condition undermined. No one said these things aloud, but I could feel them in the way conversations paused when logistics were discussed, in the way eyes avoided his wheelchair, in the way Darlene's protective fierceness around her husband intensified as the unspoken calculus became harder to ignore. It was Keisha who said it finally, not cruelly, but with the clinical directness that was both her greatest asset and her sharpest edge. If we have to evacuate quickly, we cannot carry Frank and move at survival speed. We need to acknowledge that. The silence that followed was the loudest sound the bunker had contained. Frank was the one who broke it. "She's right," he said. "Beirut, 1983. The truck bomb. We lost 241 Marines because the chain of command prioritized protocol over reality." He looked at Darlene, and his eyes held something vast and old and unafraid. "If it comes to that, you go, I stay." Darlene left the room without a word. I heard the storage room door close, then nothing. I gave Nora the letter on Friday. I did it without ceremony, handed her the envelope in the passage between the sleeping quarters and the water room, where the hum of filtration provided a thin curtain of privacy. She read it standing up, her back against the concrete wall. Her face didn't change, but her breathing did a subtle quickening, then a deliberate, controlled return to steadiness. When she finished, she folded the pages precisely along their original creases and slid them back into the envelope. "The crawlspace exit," she said quietly. "He built it after I told him the bunker made me feel like I was being buried alive. He wanted you to have a way out. He wanted a lot of things." She pressed the envelope against her sternum and held it there. "He wanted to keep me safe, and he wanted to keep me close. And he never understood that those two things were in conflict." She took a breath that seemed to draw from somewhere deeper than her lungs. But he wasn't wrong about any of it. And I left him alone with being right. I didn't offer comfort. Comfort would have been an intrusion. I stood beside her in the filtered hum and let the silence hold what words couldn't. The weekend brought escalation of a kind we hadn't anticipated. Saturday afternoon, someone pounded on the front door of the house above us. Not infected. The rhythm was too deliberate, too human. Marcus and I went up with weapons. Through the peephole, I saw 2 men and a woman. The men were armed, one with a hunting rifle, one with a pistol. The woman carried a child, maybe 3 years old, pressed against her chest. They were dirty, exhausted, and their eyes held that particular desperation of people who have run out of options and know it. "We know someone's in there," one of the men called. "We can see the generator exhaust. We need shelter. We've got a kid." I looked at Marcus. He shook his head slowly. Not a refusal of compassion, but a recognition of mathematics. 7 people were already straining our resources. 3 more, one of them a toddler, would accelerate every timeline. I opened the door. The man with the rifle was Troy Jessup, a mechanic from Cloverdale. The man with the pistol was his brother Dean. The woman was Troy's wife, Melanie, and the child was their son, Oliver. They had been moving south from Cloverdale for 3 days, sleeping in cars, surviving on vending machine food and gas station jerky. "We saw a group of them outside Greencastle," Troy said, sitting on my kitchen floor, his rifle across his knees. 30, maybe 40, just standing in the Walmart parking lot, not moving, like they were waiting. "Waiting for what?" I asked. "For something to chase," Dean said. He was younger than Troy, harder, with the watchful composure of someone who had already made decisions he couldn't take back. "They activate when something triggers them. Otherwise, they conserve." I brought them downstairs. The group's reaction was a complicated mixture of humanity and calculation. Darlene immediately took Oliver from Melanie and began heating food. Keisha examined all 3 for injuries or signs of infection. Frank asked Troy and Dean tactical questions about what they'd seen, mapping routes and concentrations on the road atlas with a pencil. Nora pulled me aside in the passage. 10 people, she said. "This bunker was built for 2. My father planned for 2. "I know. Food at current rationing lasts 40 days with 7. With 10, that's 28. "I know. So, what's the plan?" I looked back toward the main room, where Oliver was eating canned peaches, with the solemn concentration of a child who had learned not to waste food. Melanie watched him with the ferocious tenderness of a mother holding the world together through sheer will. "The plan is, we figure it out," I said. Nora studied me for a moment. "You sound like my father," she said. It wasn't entirely a compliment, but it wasn't entirely an insult either. We now numbered 10. The bunker's walls had not moved, but they felt closer. The decision to leave the bunker came not from a single crisis, but from the accumulation of pressures that made staying untenable. Food rationing tightened to a level that left everyone hungry and most people irritable. The water system, despite the rainwater supplement, couldn't sustain 10 people indefinitely. Oliver developed a cough that Keisha monitored with increasing concern. A respiratory infection in a sealed environment could spread to everyone. But it was the radio that finally tipped the balance. On Tuesday morning, Frank picked up a news signal. Not the old gathering point broadcast, something different. A woman's voice, steady and professional, identifying herself as Lieutenant Colonel Angela Torres of the Indiana National Guard. She gave coordinates for an established survivor encampment near the Cataract Lake Reservoir, roughly 20 miles northwest. She described perimeter defenses, medical facilities, food production capabilities. She gave a window for safe approach, dawn to 1000 hours daily. "It could be legitimate," Frank said. "Or it could be a trap," Dean Jessup countered. He had grown increasingly tense in the bunker's confines, a man whose response to danger was movement, and whose confinement was producing a corrosive restlessness. A military officer broadcasting on a military frequency with specific operational details is not typically a trap, Frank said with measured patience. In Cloverdale, somebody rigged a car stereo to play a baby crying, Dean said. Drew in survivors, then took their supplies at gunpoint. People aren't just dealing with infected out there. The debate consumed 2 days. Lines formed not along expected alliances, but along temperament. Those who couldn't bear the confinement, Dean, Marcus, Troy, wanted to move. Those who found safety in the bunker's certainty, Darlene, Keisha, Melanie, wanted to stay. Nora and Frank occupied a complex middle ground, both understanding the strategic arguments on each side, both reluctant to commit. I was the tiebreaker, a role I hadn't sought and wasn't qualified for. IT consultants don't make life or death decisions for 10 people. But Gary Caulfield's house was in my name, and his bunker was under my floor. And somehow that accident of real estate had become a form of authority. On Thursday evening, I proposed a compromise. A scouting team, small, armed, mobile, would travel to the coordinates and assess the encampment's legitimacy. If it was real, the full group would relocate. If it wasn't, we'd return and reassess. "Who goes?" Nora asked. "I do," I said. "Marcus, and one more." Dean volunteered instantly. Troy shook his head. He wouldn't leave Melanie and Oliver. "I'm going," Nora said. It wasn't a request. "I know the terrain between here and Cataract Lake. My father used to take me fishing there." 4 scouts, 20 miles through infected territory. We planned the route using Frank's atlas and Nora's memory, choosing back roads and field paths that avoided towns and main highways. We packed 3 days of food, water purification tablets, weapons, a first aid kit, and the hand crank radio. The night before departure, I sat with Frank in the dim light of the sleeping quarters. Everyone else had found their various ways of preparing sleep, prayer, conversation, silence. "You've done well," Frank said, "for an IT consultant." "I've been terrified every single day." "That's what doing well looks like," he said. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision that something matters more." He shifted in his wheelchair, his strong right hand gripping the armrest. "If we don't come back, if the scouts find nothing—" "We'll come back," I said. He looked at me the way he had looked at his Marines. I imagined with belief, tempered by the knowledge that belief alone has never been enough. Darlene brought me a thermos of coffee at 4 in the morning. Her eyes were red, but her hands were steady. "Bring him back good news," she said. Meaning Frank. Meaning all of them. We ascended the stairs at first light. 4 people, armed and afraid, stepping from the concrete certainty of a dead man's preparation into the uncertain dawn of a world that had stopped following the rules. The front door opened onto silence and mist. We moved into it together. The first 5 miles were farmland, open fields of dead corn and harvested soybean stubble that offered clear sight lines in every direction. We moved in a loose diamond formation, Nora on point because she knew the land, Dean and Marcus on the flanks, me at the rear with a shotgun, and a growing awareness that the bunker's sealed environment had weakened my stamina. The morning was cold, mid-November, our breath visible in the gray air. The only sounds were our footsteps, the distant caw of crows, and the wind moving through the dead corn stalks with a dry, whispering rattle. Twice we saw infected at a distance, lone figures standing motionless in fields, oriented toward nothing, conserving energy as Dean had described. We gave them wide berths, and they did not react. The farmland gave way to wooded hills as we approached the reservoir watershed. Here the terrain became more difficult ravines, creek beds, dense undergrowth that forced us into single file. Nora navigated with the confidence of embodied memory, pointing out landmarks her father had shown her decades ago. A lightning-split oak, a stone wall from a colonial-era homestead, a creek crossing where flat rocks formed natural stepping stones. It was at the creek crossing that we encountered the group. 7 people emerging from the tree line on the opposite bank. Armed, organized, wearing mismatched civilian clothing with orange armbands on their left biceps. The lead figure was a woman in her 50s, compact and composed, carrying a carbine with the ease of long familiarity. "Halt," she said. Not aggressive, but absolute. "Identify yourselves." "Survivors from Brixton," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "We picked up Lieutenant Colonel Torres's broadcast. We're scouting the encampment." The woman studied us for a long 3 seconds. "I'm Sergeant First Class Linda Park, Indiana National Guard, retired. I run the approach patrol for Cataract Station." She scanned our group, lingering on our weapons, our packs, our faces. "How many in your party total?" 10. 6 more in a secured position in Brixton." "How secured?" "Underground bunker. Reinforced concrete. Stocked." Park's eyebrows rose fractionally. "We'll escort you in. Keep weapons slung and hands visible." The encampment at Cataract Lake was real. That was the first and most important thing. Real walls, a combination of earthwork berms and vehicle barriers. Real people. I counted over 100 as we entered, moving between tents and prefab structures with the purposeful energy of organized survival. Real infrastructure, solar panels on elevated platforms, water filtration drawing from the reservoir, a medical tent with a Red Cross flag, a communications array with antenna towers cobbled from steel pipe and guy wire. Lieutenant Colonel Torres met us in the command tent. She was younger than her voice suggested, mid-40s, with close cropped hair and the sharp, evaluative gaze of someone accustomed to making rapid assessments of people and situations. "Brixton is in our expansion zone," she said, studying the map I'd marked with our route. "We've been broadcasting for 2 weeks. You're the first respondents from that area." "Most of Brixton is gone?" Nora said. Torres nodded without surprise. "Most of everywhere is gone. The question is whether enough remains to rebuild." She looked at me. "Your bunker, is it defensible as a waypoint? Could it support a small garrison?" I thought about Gary Caulfield, alone in that house for years, pouring concrete and running wires and writing operational manuals for a catastrophe that hadn't yet arrived. I thought about his letter to a stranger, his message to his daughter, his crawl space exit built from love and regret. "It could," I said. "It was built to endure." "Then we'd like to establish a supply route. Brixton to Cataract, manned and maintained. Your bunker becomes a safe house on the line." I looked at Nora. She met my eyes, and in her expression, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not her father's obsessive certainty, not her own wary distance, but something between them. Purpose without imprisonment. Preparation without isolation. "We'll need to bring our people here first," I said. "All of them." "Convoy leaves at dawn," Torres said. "We'll bring them home." Home. The word hung in the filtered air of the command tent, like a question being answered for the first time. We brought them in on a Thursday. Frank rolled through the gates of Cataract Station in a military transport vehicle, Darlene beside him, their hands intertwined across the armrest of his wheelchair. Melanie carried Oliver on her hip, his small face turned toward the reservoir where sunlight fractured across the water. Marcus and Keisha walked together through the gate with the quiet relief of people setting down a weight they'd carried too long. The bunker on Harlow Street became Waypoint 7 on the supply route between Cataract and the southern settlements. Nora volunteered to maintain it. I think she needed to finish something with her father that his death had interrupted, not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. She hung his letter on the wall of the sleeping quarters, beside the operational manual, where every traveler who passed through could read both the instructions and the apology. I stayed at Cataract. I maintained communications systems because the apocalypse still needs IT support. And the absurdity of that continuity became its own quiet comfort. Some nights I climbed the observation tower and looked south toward Brixton, toward a house I bought for $12,000 that turned out to be worth everything. Gary Caulfield built a bunker for the end of the world. We turned it into a beginning.